Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the renewed framework for registered early years settings, preschools and nurseries. I'm going to start with a few introductions. So I'm Jayne Coward. I'm Deputy Director for Early Years Regulatory Policy and Practice. Wendy?
Thanks, Jayne. My name's Wendy Ratcliffe. I'm one of His Majesty's Inspectors, and I'm also Ofsted's Principal Officer for our Early Education Policy. Sam.
Hi everyone, I'm Sam Sleeman-Boss. I'm an early years inspector and I work in the early education policy team as quality and practice lead.
Brilliant, thank you. And these colleagues have been instrumental in the development of this new approach. So we're delighted to be here to welcome you to this webinar to update you on the changes to the way we'll be inspecting early years from November. Okay, so let's move into the main body of the presentation this evening. So on this slide, you can see the outline of our session this evening. We're going to talk to you a little bit about our journey so far, so how we've got to this point, and then we'll move into talking about our new approach and some more detail around the renewed framework and the documentation. We'll be sharing with you the changes we'll be making from November 2025 and what they mean for you as a registered early years setting. As I've said already, we have allowed time towards the end of this webinar to answer any questions you might have. We've also had quite a few pre-submitted questions, so huge thank you for taking the time to submit these. And we've tried to weave as many as we can into the presentation as we go along. But as I say, please do continue to submit questions as we go, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can, either by typing a reply or by going through questions at the end. Great. So, Wendy, I think I'm handing over to you.
You are, thank you, Jayne. And to start, a great reminder for us that every one of us, regardless of our role, has a desire to work for babies and children of all ages to make sure that they receive a high quality standard of education and care, one that enables all children to achieve, belong and thrive. So collectively, we want to achieve this. And this is about raising standards. We know, don't we, children get one childhood, and we will continue to put them first. We want great outcomes for all children, because we know if we get it right for the most vulnerable, then we get it right for all children. And for the first time, inclusion will be a focus on every one of our inspections. Parents have told us that they want better and more detailed information about their child's preschool, nursery, childminder, or out of school club, highlighting the setting's strengths and areas for improvement. And of course, we also need to be fair to settings. So it's important to point out where settings don't meet the expected standards, but it's also important to celebrate exceptionality. On all inspections, we will celebrate strengths, validate leaders' priorities and progress, and highlight where improvement is needed. And we remain committed to improving how it feels to be inspected, while continuing to encourage and support settings to raise standards. Inspections can help you as leaders and practitioners focus on delivering your expectations more effectively and efficiently. And we do not expect you as settings to be doing any more than you need to. So don't be doing any more for us, for Ofsted. We're committed to working with you from the outset to determine the areas of inspection focus and to agree the most appropriate activities tailored to your settings. And an important point to make, when we talk about leaders in our published documentation, we mean leaders of all provider types, and that includes childminders, who are the leaders as well as the practitioners in their settings. So let's have a look at our journey so far. We started with the case for change. Leaders of education and care settings and other early years stakeholders know and understand the importance of accountability, given their daily responsibilities in educating and caring for our youngest children. But for many years, calls have been made to look again at the burdens created by this accountability, of which Ofsted is just one actor in a complex system. Last year, we held the Big Listen to give you and other stakeholders the chance to help shape the future of our inspections. So thank you to those of you from the early years sector who took the time to respond. Your comments have made a difference. Following the Big Listen, we set out an ambition to reset relationships with the professionals we inspect and regulate while retaining the confidence of the children, parents and carers we work for. This included a commitment to renew the education inspection framework and introduce new report cards. So earlier in the year, in February, we held a 12-week consultation which set out a series of proposals for change, covering all education providers, including early years settings. We received more than 6,500 responses to the online consultation from parents and educational professionals. Feedback was gathered in a range of ways, including through focus groups, in-depth discussions with experts, and test visits to volunteer settings. So thank you if you took part in some of those test visits as well. So the changes we're setting out in the webinar today are based on this rich and varied evidence. Alongside the consultation response, which you will find on our gov.uk website, we have published the final versions of the education inspection toolkits and the new operating guides, which describe how the revised methodology will change the look and feel of inspection. The reforms will come into effect in November this year. They're coming into effect for early years, state-funded schools and further education colleges, with initial teacher education and independent schools following in January. Jayne, back to you to tell us about our new approach.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Wendy. Okay, so on this slide you can see a summary of the key changes, and I'm going to talk us through these. So if you cast your mind back to February when we published our consultations, we were very clear that these were proposals and that nothing was set in stone. So thank you if you took the time to respond to that consultation. We've listened carefully to all the feedback we received, and we've also tested and further refined our methodology. We do believe our new approach represents the right balance between the interests of children and parents and the wishes of you as educational professionals working in the sector. Our core purpose and driving mission remains the same: to keep children safe and improve their lives. So let's look at some of these changes in more detail. So there's a new inspection report card, which will provide more nuance for parents and providers, combining at-a-glance grades with narrative summaries of strengths and areas for improvement. Following extensive feedback and user testing of February's proposed version, the report card has been redesigned to make it more accessible, particularly on mobile devices, as our researchers told us that this is the medium by which most parents access settings reports. There'll be a 5-point grading scale that will set high expectations while encouraging improvement where it's needed. In response to feedback, however, through the consultations from yourselves and from parents about the proposed wording, the final set of grades has changed to urgent improvement, needs attention, expected standard, strong standard, and to identify the very best practice in the country, we have changed the highest grade to exceptional. In a further change from the initial proposals in the consultation, settings will now not be asked to submit a case study for approval. Instead, inspectors will evaluate exceptional practice by applying the toolkit subject to our usual quality assurance and consistency testing. As I'm sure you've heard, there's a renewed focus on inclusion to help break down barriers to learning and wellbeing, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail later on in this presentation. There's a new specific early years inspection toolkit for grading settings. This toolkit shows leaders and inspectors the evaluation areas that we'll focus on and how we'll assess and grade providers. There is a wider range of evaluation areas than in our current methodology, but again, following feedback, the number of core evaluation areas has been streamlined and we'll talk about that in more detail as we move through this presentation. Again, in response to your feedback, the definitions of the grades have been tightened to more clearly differentiate between them. Similarly, the standards covered in the toolkits have also been slimmed down, so there's greater clarity on the evidence that inspectors will assess. We're really conscious of the workload for you, the education workforce. The toolkits are designed to assess the professional standards, statutory and non-statutory requirements already placed on settings. So in our sector, for EY, that's those requirements set out in the EYFS, the Early Years Foundation stage. We'll also evaluate your work to support and promote staff and wellbeing, and this will be considered as part of the leadership and governance evaluation area. It's really key that our inspection findings are grounded in a clear understanding of your setting's unique circumstances. And if you've had a chance to look at the new operating guide, that sets out how leaders and inspectors will reflect on a provider's context and priorities. We've got a new online insights platform, Ofsted Explore an Area. This will give parents key information about the education and care services in their local area. Inspectors will use this tool to understand the local area the setting is operating in when preparing for inspection. And you'll also be able to access it. It's not currently available, but it'll be there for launch in November. In early years, as I'm sure you're all aware, we're the regulator. So we have tightened our ability to regulate through this framework, learning from our reviews of when things have gone wrong. As I've said already, we've more closely aligned our framework to the Early Years Foundation Early Years Foundation statutory framework, and therefore to reach the expected standard, settings need to be meeting all of the requirements of registration and the EYFS. Where settings are graded urgent improvement in any evaluation area, we will not normally re-inspect them within 6 months. I'll say that again. Where settings are graded urgent improvement in any area, we will normally re-inspect them within 6 months. For settings that are graded needs attention in any evaluation area, or where safeguarding standards are met, we will normally re-inspect them within a year. Sam, I think I'm handing over to you.
Thanks, Jane. So let's have a look at our renewed approach in a bit more detail. We will put babies and children first, breaking barriers down by raising standards up, especially for the most disadvantaged and vulnerable. We'll improve the way we report and the content of inspection findings to parents and carers. And we'll improve the look and feel of inspection for you, for education settings and professionals with a more collaborative approach. We'll maintain our focus on having care and concern for the well-being and workload of leaders and staff, and we'll take context into greater account on inspection. We'll make inspections consistent in approach and continue to improve our process for allowing inspections to be challenged. We'll provide constructive next steps to improve based on the conversations that we have with leaders, and we'll be different by design. So as Jane said, we've further tailored our inspection approach to each remit and provision type within them. For example, we've worked to align regulation and inspection standards in early years, so the renewed framework is more closely aligned to the EYFS. As we've already said, we'll put babies and children first, breaking down any barriers to learning and wellbeing, progress and achievement by raising standards, especially for the most disadvantaged and vulnerable. And this is why we're introducing a separate inclusion evaluation area, and inclusion will also be a key theme across other evaluation areas. As part of this evaluation area, our inspections will look at how settings are addressing barriers to learning for all children. And we'll always start with those that the government asks settings to focus on, whether through statutory obligations or non-statutory guidance. That's why we're particularly emphasising those from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, those with SEND, and those known or previously known to children's social care. We'll also evaluate how well settings ensure high quality support for all children who may face other barriers to their learning and/or wellbeing, working with leaders to understand their context, informed by data and professional dialogue. And we've also revised how we describe inclusion. We agree with the feedback that we received that it is not for Ofsted to define inclusion. And so we're describing this as our approach to inclusion, which is captured in the way we've drafted our toolkits and inspection.
Thanks, Sam. Let's think about the evaluation areas in early years. The evaluation areas in early years are specifically designed to align with the statutory Early Years Foundation Stage framework, so the EYFS. Safeguarding standards will be given a met or not met evaluation in early years, as in schools and other remits. And along with inclusion that Sam's already touched on and safeguarding, the evaluation areas for early years are on this slide. So we have curriculum and teaching, achievement, behaviour, attitudes and establishing routines, children's welfare and well-being, and finally, leadership and governance. And we've merged developing teaching with curriculum to create a single curriculum and teaching evaluation area. Now, there are some nuances. So where there are no early years children present or on roll at the time of an inspection, inspectors will only evaluate and grade leadership and governance, as there's no reliable evidence on which to assess the impact on children of other evaluation areas. So inspectors will use this evaluation area to determine the provider's ongoing suitability to meet the requirements of the EYFS and the childcare register, if this is applicable. And they will grade against the expected standard, needs attention, and urgent improvement grades only. Now, in case there are any providers of before and after school care on the webinar this evening, just a note to say that because the learning and development requirements of the EYFS do not apply to before and after school settings and holiday provision, this includes childminders who only provide care before and after school or during school holidays for children who would normally attend reception classes during the school day. We will only look at evaluation areas that are relevant. So therefore, the curriculum and teaching and achievement evaluation areas are not applicable to out of school settings. So let's think a little bit more about inclusion. In early years, we will look at inclusion by observing, discussing, considering, and also thinking about case sampling. In early years, when evaluating inclusion, we will gather evidence that reflects the typical experiences of children, the systems and processes leaders put in place for practitioners to work with parents in meeting children's different needs, whilst taking into account the context of the setting. Evidence gathered on areas like curriculum and teaching, for example, will also consider how well these are designed inclusively to meet the needs of children who face barriers to their learning and well-being. We'll talk a little bit more about case sampling in a few minutes, but importantly, we want to emphasise that case sampling is not the same as a case study, and we do not require settings to prepare case studies for an inspection. So let's put straight a potential misconception from the start. Jayne, I'm handing over to you now to explain our toolkits and what the changes mean for early years settings.
Great, thanks, Wendy. So let's talk a little bit more about how the toolkit's going to work in early years. So our toolkits show leaders and inspectors the evaluation areas that we'll focus on, and within them the standards we will evaluate and use to grade settings. Inspectors will apply the toolkit evaluation areas, themes and standards, tailoring evaluations to each setting's context. Nothing in the standards set out in the toolkit should add to a setting's workload. Our toolkits are built, as we've already said, on the requirements, standards and expectations already placed on leaders and their provision. So in early years, this is the EYFS. Inspections can then help settings to focus on delivering these requirements more efficiently and effectively. We do not expect any setting to be doing anything just for Ofsted. There genuinely is no expectation for settings to do anything different or additional for Ofsted that isn't already part of your usual day-to-day business. Nor do we expect settings to have completed any formal self-evaluation. However, you may wish to use the toolkit to support your own continuing improvement. As we've already said, we have carefully reflected on evaluation areas in our consultation and how these should apply for different sectors. Sam.
Thanks, Jane. So let's walk through an evaluation area. There's a covering page for each evaluation area, which includes a summative statement at the top of what the evaluation area considers. This is designed to help settings and inspectors to see at a glance what the evaluation area is about. There follows a statement to remind us that our grading standards are based on what settings are already required to do and, as previously explained, are based on statutory duties and statutory and non-statutory guidance. The renewed framework is based on existing professional standards and expectations that settings should already be meeting. And as our Chief Inspector, Sir Martin Oliver, has said, the toolkits will make it clearer than we ever have that settings shouldn't be doing anything just for the day that our inspectors come in. They shouldn't be spending a single minute or penny on anything that isn't in the best interests of their or your children. Following that, the toolkit sets out the most significant contributory factors that underpin our approaches to evidence gathering and grading. And this is very much based on the research that underpinned the education inspection framework. We've been clear that our renewed framework will ensure consistency of inspection practice. We've also made sure that the toolkit is reflective of each remit and the different provider types within it. In our early years toolkit, we've included an explanation of how it should be applied within different provider types. For example, in achievement, you can see here on the slide, inspectors will consider what practice looks like in a childminder or for the different ages of children. This helps settings see that the standards are not generic statements, but are carefully tailored to reflect the different ages of children as well as provision type. And where relevant, this section sets out the areas that apply to out-of-school settings as well as when we inspect when there are no children present or on roll. In short, the toolkit seeks to make it clear how we will apply each evaluation area in a setting like yours and what you can expect inspectors to be looking at in practice.
Thanks, Sam. So once we have set out what an evaluation area covers, the toolkit then moves into more detail about the kinds of evidence inspectors will gather. As you can see on the slide, each evaluation area considers themes and then gives prompts that guide inspectors' observations and conversations. Each evaluation area always starts with a theme about strategic leadership of that area and ends with a theme about inclusive practices in that area. Now, these prompts are not a checklist for settings. They are there to help inspectors think about what to explore and discuss in gathering evidence in context, and to make sure the evaluation is consistent and fair. So, for example, in curriculum and teaching, inspectors might consider how well the curriculum is sequenced, or how practitioners adapt their approaches for children with different starting points. In leadership, prompts might focus on how leaders support professional development and ensure the curriculum is well taught. So the key takeaway from this slide is that the toolkit makes inspection more transparent. You can see the themes inspectors will explore through our observations and discussions, and that will help shape evidence gathering.
Great, thanks, Wendy. Okay, we're moving on now to think about the next section in each evaluation area, which looks at the grading. And just to pick up on a question in the chat about how our current 4-point grading scale applies to the new 5-point grading scale. And just to be really clear, there isn't any crossover between what was previously good, previously outstanding, previously requires improvement, and the judgments that we're now talking about under the renewed framework. These are new grading areas. So each evaluation in the toolkit is graded on a new 5-point scale. This is with the exception of safeguarding, which is met, not met. What you see here are the grades we expect to see most often on inspection. So needs attention, expected standard, and strong standard. The expected standard is in the middle, and this is the baseline for inspection. It reflects what is required of a setting, and it is the starting point for all inspections, and this is why it's in the centre of the page. And if you remember what we said towards the end of this towards the beginning of this presentation, we said that in order to meet expected standard, then providers would need to be meeting all the requirements of the early years foundation stage. One clear distinction with the renewed framework is that we'll be looking for a secure fit, not a best fit. That is, to meet the expected standard or the strong standard, a setting will need to meet all of the standards in that column. You will see words such as typically and generally in the expected standard. This is to recognise that the expected standard is not about perfection. For example, you might have an area of learning which is being developed well, but does not yet quite meet the same standards as the other areas consistently. So if this was the case, the setting may still be graded as having a secure fit within the expected standard. The needs attention column contains indicators and not standards. An evaluation area is likely to be graded needs attention when there is not a secure fit for the expected standard. The indicators in this column and the 3 bullets that is on the left-hand side of this slide are designed to exemplify why a setting might not be meeting the expected standard. And these indicators are deliberately worded positively to acknowledge what leaders are doing, but pointing out where something needs attention as it is not a secure fit with the expected standard. They are worded in a similar way in each evaluation area. Now, we've said all along that we expect more settings to have varied grade profiles and more settings that may have areas that need attention. Our Chief Inspector, Sir Martin, has referenced the need for nuanced grading in many of his speeches recently, stating that grades for specific evaluation areas will allow for a more detailed and representative assessment. Individual grading of the evaluation areas will enable parents and carers to be able to see in more detail what's really special about your setting, what you do well, and what you're working on. So on the previous slide, we looked at the grades that inspectors will use most often. Here we're focusing on the 2 ends of the scale that we expect to see much less frequently, so urgent improvement and exceptional. Urgent improvement applies when the expected standards have clearly not been met and where there are serious concerns about the impact of the setting's work in the relevant evaluation area. The indicators explain what this might look like in practice. These are occasions when significant improvement is needed because breaches to the EYFS requirements are having a significant impact on children's safety, well-being, and/or their learning and development. At the other end of the scale is exceptional. This grade is for settings where the evidence shows that standards are not only strong, but truly transformational. That means everything in the strong standard is already being met securely and consistently, and leaders are making a sustained difference for children and that we could share this practice more widely beyond their own setting. Both urgent improvement and exceptional are important parts of the 5-point scale, but they will be much less common in practice. The majority of evaluations will fall into the middle 3 grades that we looked at on the previous slide.
Thanks, Jane. Now let's remind ourselves of some of the key aspects underpinning our renewed approach. We want inspections that will look and feel different. We're moving towards a more supportive, empathetic approach to inspections in which the starting point will be expected standard. We will take each setting's context into account, and we will adopt a more collaborative approach. We have extensively tested our inspection methodology, revising our approach to make inspection feel a more collaborative process. And we will be consistent in our approach to inspections and continue to improve our process for settings to feedback about their inspection experience. We will provide next steps for improvement based on inspection evidence, which includes conversations with leaders. And we will take a values-driven approach to inspections that will be professional, empathetic, respectful, and courteous throughout the inspection process. And the Ofsted Academy is running the largest package of training to inspectors that Ofsted has ever offered prior to a framework change. alongside webinars such as these and events for education professionals. And just a note to say that through our Ofsted Academy, we will be publishing the training that we provide to inspectors once we have provided that training. Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Wendy. So here are some important changes for the inspection of early year settings. Inspectors will consider data in understanding the provider's context, and as you've heard, we'll have a tool called Ofsted Explore an Area that you'll be able to access as well. And this is published data for inspectors to understand the context of the local community that you're working in. And that information includes deprivation data, take-up of the early years pupil premium funding, obesity levels, and oral health data. Under the renewed framework, we're going to be making the notification call before 10 a.m. We know how busy it is at lunch times, so we'll be calling now in future before 10 a.m. So you can expect to hear from us then. We'll be using an email for sharing and receiving information before the inspection. So an email will be sent to you, signposting you to useful information about inspection, as well as asking you to prepare data needed about children and staff at the setting. So this is information that we already ask for currently in the notification call. It includes data such as numbers of children on roll, numbers of children in receipt of early years pupil premium funding, and qualifications of staff, etc. But we hope that this change really helps you to feel that you're not expected to know that information during the notification call. As well as the notification call, we'll have a planning call with leaders ahead of the inspection. And this really is for inspectors to understand the unique context of the setting, the setting's curriculum overview, and what leaders see as the strengths and priorities for improvement. So we'll no longer complete a learning walk with leaders because we will have already gathered that information during the planning call. Inspectors will make shared observations and have leaders and have increased and ongoing professional dialogue with leaders throughout the inspection. So leaders will be able to be alongside inspectors throughout the inspection for as much as they can or want to, and where it's appropriate to do so. But we also respect that there are some settings where leaders are in ratio. So we will do as we usually do and find time to have shared observations with leaders flexibly. We'll inform childminders of the day that we'll be inspecting. So childminders will be inspected within 5 working days of the notification call, and inspectors will agree with them which day is best to inspect, taking into account the children who will be attending. And we will no longer grade out of school providers as met or not met. Instead, for all of the evaluation areas, except safeguarding, which will be met or not met, the 5-point grading scale will be used.
Thanks, Sam. Let's think about what happens before an inspector arrives then. So, as Sam has already said, for group providers, inspectors must call the setting before 10 a.m. on the working day before the inspection. And as with now, for childminders and group settings that do not operate regularly, such as summer play schemes, inspectors must call the setting no more than 5 working days before the inspection to check which days they are operating and whether there are children on roll and present. For childminders, as Sam has said, inspectors will discuss and identify the most suitable day for the inspection to take place. So childminders will now know when to inspect their inspection. Now, some of you may have heard reference to a nominee. The nominee is a role that will not be relevant for most inspections. It's distinct from the nominated individual and does not replace this. So for childminders or smaller group-based settings, there's no need for a nominee. It's for larger group-based providers or on inspections where there is more than one inspectors, leaders might want to nominate someone to be the nominee if it's practical to do so. And that's because their involvement can help the inspection to run smoothly and remain focused and purposeful. but this person must have a thorough knowledge of how the setting operates on a day-to-day basis. But during the notification call, inspectors will ask if there will be a nominee and encourage them to join the planning call. And you can find out more about the role of nominee in our operating guides. Inspectors will call you for the planning call at the time that was agreed with you in the notification call. The call will not be recorded, but you're welcome to take notes. And the aim of the planning call is to introduce ourselves as inspectors and to discuss practicalities. It's to understand the settings context and to plan the timetable. And as we've already said, you will have discussed with the inspector what you want all children to know and achieve at your setting. So as Sam says, there is no longer the need for a learning walk. Now, it's important to say here that we may still inspect without notice when our risk assessment deems that appropriate. And that's explained in more detail in our operating guide and supporting additional guidance. However, when we inspect without notice, anything that we would have covered during the planning call will be covered and discussed on arrival. Sam, back to you.
Thanks, Wendy. So what will we do on inspection? Inspectors will gather evidence to enable them to celebrate strengths in children's achievement, belonging, and ability to thrive, validate leaders' priorities and progress, and highlight priorities for improvement. So as they do now, all inspections will begin with a brief introduction with leaders and staff. And our inspections will be grounded in professional dialogue. So through observation and discussion with the person who knows the setting and children best, inspectors will consider what leaders are aiming to achieve, how well they're doing it, and how they know it's working. Throughout inspection, we'll give particular attention to the experiences and outcomes of all children, but particularly those who face barriers to their learning and/or well-being. Most evidence will be gathered through shared observations with leaders and ongoing discussions with leaders and practitioners. And we'll want to speak with the practitioner designated to take the lead responsibility for safeguarding and talk to the SENCO where appropriate. Now, as part of the shared observations, inspectors will track the experiences of a case sample of children relative to the size of the setting. And they'll focus on the outcomes and experiences of children, especially those who are disadvantaged, have SEND, or who leaders have identified as being particularly vulnerable. And they're likely to want to talk to the parents of those children as well. We'll observe children at play and in their daily routines, as well as the interactions between practitioners and children. Inspectors will take time for regular reflection on their own before joining leaders for collaborative, reflective discussions about what they've seen and heard in the shared observations together. And inspectors will agree with you who might also attend these discussions. As part of these discussions, inspectors will encourage leaders to reflect on the shared observations and whether they've observed what the setting is typically like. And they'll discuss then whether any inspection activity needs to be adapted in light of emerging evidence. These discussions are an opportunity to review the evidence in relation to the toolkit evaluation areas covered so far. And throughout the inspection, inspectors will be considering, as I said, the experiences of children identified for case sampling, and those will be a representative sample of children of different ages, including babies, but particularly those who are disadvantaged, those with SEND, those known or previously known to children's social care, and those who face other barriers to their learning and/or well-being. Now, when we inspect the range of different size and type of early years settings, we inspect in a way that works for their specific context. We make practical adjustments to ensure that the inspection methodology is applied proportionately to their context. So, for example, in childminder settings, we already spend time reflecting with childminders as we observe their practice. And as we said earlier, in out-of-school settings, we will not evaluate curriculum and teaching or achievement, as these provider types do not need to meet the EYFS learning and development requirements. Wendy, over to you to give us some more information on report cards.
Thanks, Sam. And I can see there's been a couple of questions around report cards, so I'm hoping that what we talk about on this slide will help answer those. So this slide shows an example of what the report card looks like, and we are bringing together the most popular preferences of parents and professionals by combining separate grades, rating scales, and short summaries into new report cards. The narrative gives a detailed picture of performance, while the 5-point scale offers the clarity and simplicity that parents have asked for. So at the end of the inspection, the inspector will write a report card which will reflect the evidence gathered. It will be clear, concise, and focused on what matters most, as informed by the setting's context, leaders' evaluation of their setting, and the toolkit. And it will explain the grade given for each evaluation area. It will make clear what the setting should improve. And of course, it will be consistent with the verbal feedback given to the setting at the end of the inspection. Now let's think about what happens after the inspection. I won't spend too long on this slide because our post-inspection arrangements regarding report publication are the same as they are under the original EIF. So report cards will be sent to providers after moderation, quality assurance, and consistency checking. And in most cases, this will be within 18 days of the inspection. Leaders can share inspection findings with whoever they consider appropriate. However, the information should not be made public or shared with parents until the provider receives the final report card. And settings have 5 working days to comment on the draft report card. They can highlight minor points of clarity or factual accuracy, which we will respond to when we share the final report card. Settings can continue to submit a complaint seeking a review of the inspection process, including grades given or concerns about the inspector's conduct. And we will respond to any complaint before we finalise and send the final report card to the provider. We normally publish final report cards within 30 working days of the inspection, although this may take longer where there is a complaint. And just a reminder, once settings you receive that final report card, you'll know that it's required by law to make that available to parents. Jayne, over to you to tell us about Steady and Assured Start.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to think about what's happening from now up to when we start our live inspections from November the 10th. So if you have a look at this graphic on the screen now, where the little green arrow is, that's where we are now. And we've just published, as you know, our response to the consultation alongside our operating guide, our early years inspection toolkit, and our inspector information documents. And we'll give you a link at the end of this presentation to where you can find those resources if you haven't been able to locate them so far. So over the next month, we'll be hosting a number of engagement events such as this, webinars, attending sector events, and all education inspectors will be completing comprehensive training in this timeframe to support the transition to the renewed framework before being deployed on a live inspection from November. For openness and transparency, full inspector training materials will continue to be published online via the Ofsted Academy once inspectors have completed the face-to-face training, so likely towards the end of this year. In addition to this training package, we're also going to be undertaking pilot visits to volunteer settings, and thank you to anyone on this call who's already volunteered, and that will give our inspectors and yourselves vital experience of a full end-to-end inspection before we go live in November. So we will continue to inspect under the current framework until the end of this month, and then we will resume routine inspections under the renewed framework from November the 10th as planned. We may still carry out some of our important regulatory work through October. We will also conduct, as I've said, a series of pilot inspections. In order to reassure yourselves as education providers about the November rollout of inspections under the renewed inspection framework, we have set out several measures to support what we're calling a steady and assured start. Because there'll be enhanced quality assurance processes, we will see fewer inspections to begin with, and those will be led only by our most senior and experienced inspectors, assisted by Ofsted's in-house teams. Our part-time and contracted Ofsted inspectors will be phased in following their training also. In the autumn term, a random sample of providers will be invited to take part in exit interviews with our Chief Inspector, Sir Martin Oliver, our National Director, Lee Ouston, and other senior Ofsted officials, so that we can hear and they can hear firsthand about the inspection experience and reflect on the implementation of the reforms. Our Chief Inspector will also invite sector representatives to roundtable meetings to share their thoughts on the renewed framework as part of our commitment to transparency and listening to feedback. During our steady and assured start, all requests for an inspection deferral will be reviewed by Ofsted's Deputy Chief Inspector to make sure each case is treated with sensitivity and consideration. Our telephone helpline for leaders to raise queries and concerns will be open before, during and after an inspection. And to allow for further inspection training, there'll be no routine inspections in the week before Christmas, though again, we may still need to carry out some of our regulatory work. Wendy, I'm passing back to you before we move to questions.
Thanks, Jayne. So let's think about measuring impact. So we will assess how our reforms are working by delivering a programme of evaluation to understand the implementation and impact of our reforms. The evaluation plan will include various elements, including the things on this slide here. So it will include an externally commissioned evaluation of the renewed inspection framework, and it will also include engagement with stakeholders about that implementation as well. And we will also hold a programme of work to measure our consistency. So that will include testing consistency through shadow inspections. We'll also look at some of our desk-based examples and through data that informs weekly consistency meetings as well. Now, we said at the beginning we would be sharing a code so that you could get the link to our resources. So let's hover on this slide just for a moment. So this QR code will take you to those published documentation that we have talked about and referred to throughout this webinar. So let's leave that there just for a moment before we just put our cameras back on and get ready to take some questions from you. Okay, let's think about questions.
There's quite a few questions around the 6-year cycle moving to the 4-year cycle. So if I can just do a bit of an explanation there just to allay people's fears. So we're currently in a 6-year window. DfE announced in their strategy that we'll be moving to a 4-year window from April next year. And this will be a transitioned move to 4 years. You can imagine there's thousands of settings across England, so we need to plan that transition. Please don't be concerned about it. We will publish more information to support this transition nearer to the time. There's also quite a few questions around notifications and planning calls. So if I just take a second just to clarify that. So notification calls will take place around 10 AM on the day before your inspection visit, where that inspection is being announced. It may be a bit before, but around 10 AM. It's not set in stone. And please be assured, if we can't get a hold of you at the first time we ring you, we will try again. We will endeavour to speak to you. We want to have these conversations and to start that relationship prior to us arriving on site for your inspection. During that notification call, together, you and the inspector will arrange the best time for the planning call, which will happen later that same day. So notification call first, early in the morning, a short call, and then we'll spend that time deciding when we can have the longer call, usually up to 30 minutes. I think somebody said in the chat we could all talk for ages about our provision. Absolutely. The purpose of the planning call is to get some high level information around context, etc., and for us to have those more detailed discussions once we're with you on site during the inspection. I know there's a lot to take in on this webinar. The idea is to give you a flavour. Please do go and look at the published documents that we sent you the link to, particularly for notification and planning calls. There's lots of really good detail in those operating guides that will really help you start thinking about notification and planning calls. Well, in fact, the whole methodology. But for those of you who are particularly concerned about that planning call, please do go and have a look in the operating guide. I'm sure it will put your mind at rest.
Jayne, there's also something just noticing in the chat, there's still quite a few queries about the moving from 6-year window to the 4-year window, and what does that mean for first inspection timeframes. And I think one of the things that, you know, please don't worry about that. As Jayne says, we will be moving towards a 4-year window come April next year. It will take us time to get to that point, but we will be publishing further information as we go on that journey. So we were thinking earlier that we thought a blog might be helpful, so that will help relay and give you more information about that process.
Brilliant, thanks Wendy. There's a few questions around the role of the nominated person as well. I don't know if one of you want to pick that one up, particularly about their role as part of the inspection, should you choose to have a nominated individual, because this role certainly isn't mandatory.
Don't know if you want me to pick that one up, Wendy.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, so the role of the nominee really is to help the inspection run smoothly. And in most cases, settings are not going to require a nominee. The leader and the inspector will work together to make sure that the setting runs smoothly. But in larger, more complex settings, it might be that you would like to have a nominee. That person does need to have good knowledge of the setting, the day-to-day running of the setting, and the children who are at the setting. Yes, I think don't worry too much about it, because we'll talk to you about it in the notification call, and we're also going to be putting on some training for nominees if that's something that would be helpful.
Great, thanks, Sam. Oh, my sound hasn't come. There you go. A bit of a lag. Sorry, with my sound coming off. There's a few questions around schools and early years, and just to clarify that these changes in terms of renewed framework apply to all education remits. So that's ourselves in early years, schools, further education and skills, and ITE and independent schools. So from November, the renewed framework will come into effect for schools, further education and skills, and early years. And each of those separate remits has their own inspection toolkit. So just for clarity, what we're talking about here is the early years toolkit, and that's for registered early years settings, those settings that are registered on our early years register.
So shall I just say a little bit more about that? And that's to do with the fact that we're required to do 2 different things in those 2 different places. So if you've got, if you're here from a school and you've got early years provision that isn't registered, because it doesn't need to be, then you need to have a look at the school's operating guide and the school's toolkit. You will find that there is an evaluation area around early years, and that links to the fact that your early years nursery class, your reception class, is part of the whole school, whereas for registered early years is the whole of the inspection, because it's the whole of the provision. So hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Wendy. I'm just going to touch as well on the fact that we've got separate grades and not an overall effectiveness grade anymore, because there's a couple of questions around that. So there is no overall effectiveness grade. You will receive grades for each of the evaluation areas, met, not met for safeguarding. So people are asking how they might relay that information back to parents. So, you know, up to you to decide how best you want to share that information, but we will be having the new style report cards that we talked about before, which will show the evaluation areas and the grade that was given for each of those evaluation areas. So, and if you remember the graphic that was shown earlier on in the presentation, but there'll be a dot for each of the evaluation areas against the grade received, and if you click on that, then you'll be able to see some more detailed narrative sitting behind that that describes, for example, what it's like at your setting in terms of curriculum and teaching or achievement. So no overall effectiveness grades, individual grades for each of the evaluation areas, and a met not met for safeguarding. So we've got about a minute left. Wendy, did you have a question you wanted to pick up?
I did. I've just spotted one that's really, really important, and I just want to make sure that we're really clear about. We've got a question here from Laura who says, will you require evidence of data, children's learning journeys, etc., or are you continuing the focus on reducing paperwork in early years and will gather information from observations and conversations? I'm going to let Sam answer that one.
Absolutely. We will continue discussing with key persons, the children in your setting. We will not look at data. We just want to talk to you about what your children knew and could do when they arrived at your setting, what they can do now, and how you've helped them to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam. And one thing that we don't want to do, we don't want you to be, not having those important interactions with children, those interactions that we know can make all the difference because you're filling out paperwork because you think we might want to see it. Please don't do that.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm conscious that there's lots of questions. Please be assured that we will take all the questions that we haven't answered. We'll be publishing frequently asked questions for the renewed framework. So don't worry if we haven't specifically answered your question, you will get an answer. And just in the dying seconds of this evening, again, a few people asking about when does this renewed framework take effect from. What we've talked about today in terms of this renewed framework early years inspection toolkit, that is from November the 10th. So if you're inspected between now and the end of the month, it'll be under the old existing EIF framework. These inspections will not start till November the 10th. Brilliant. Well, all that's left for me to do is to say a huge thank you for your time tonight, and a thank you to Wendy and Sam for supporting me in the webinar tonight. Please remember this has been recorded and we will send you out a link to this and the slides once it's available on YouTube. Thanks very much and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.